Hey, deserving listeners, a lot of you have been asking for a long time for me to watch this show called Couples Therapy on Showtime. And so let's watch the show and see if anything of interest comes out of my face. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda, and I have been practicing and teaching couples therapy for over 20 years. I'm guessing I'm going to have a lot of things to say. Let's watch the show.
You're barking up the wrong tree. And I wasn't listening, and I wasn't getting it. And I was like, oh, just shh. I gotta, just wait till the weekend. Just wait till the weekend. And he said, cancel everything. I'm not going with you. I don't want anything. I don't want this. And by the way, where's my passport? And he went to Italy.
Okay, so first reaction, she's leaning in very heavily, which I don't usually do. Nothing wrong with that. And that really conveys that she's very much paying attention, and that's good, body language for really paying attention. And it's something that I try to get my trainees to be a little bit more flexible of. When you're a trainee and you're nervous and you're terrified, you tend to sit very rigidly and kind of leaning back because you're afraid of your clients. And so I try to get my trainees to loosen up and just be themselves, just act, if your friend was telling you a story, how would you listen to them? Would you listen very rigidly and be taking notes and be thinking, what is the best thing to say at the end of their sentence? You wouldn't be doing that. You would be going, oh my God, you'd be authentic and real and in the moment. So that therapist seemed very in the moment. So let's continue watching.
Have a seat. Okay.
I don't have complicated needs. I am utterly transparent and completely communicative about what it is I want. I'm also totally consistent.
So the first question I have is, so these are not actors. These are real people in real therapy, which is great if that's the case, because the one thing about training therapists to become therapists is, like if you're training a plumber, I always choose plumber as the another profession to use analogies with. And if you're a plumber and you're training another plumber, you go to a pipe and you say, this is how you do this, or, look at this, or this is how this happens, or look at this thing. And you actually get hands-on. You might even direct your apprentice to, okay, why don't you do that? Why don't you fix it and I'll watch you? The thing about therapy is that clients usually don't want a bunch of people watching what's happening. They usually just want their therapist to be there. And clients deserve confidentiality. And a lot of therapists aren't comfortable with cameras being in the room because a lot of therapists are terribly insecure, I'm here to tell you. So we don't have a lot of examples of actual couples therapy for trainees to watch. And what we end up having to do is we end up either having to role play in the class. So we'll get students to just role play clients, which is very hard for students to do because they're not improv actors. They might not know what a real client operates like. They're in a fishbowl format where the whole classroom is watching, so they're nervous. Or you get actors sometimes, but again, that's not really necessarily authentic. Or we will watch videos of actors acting like their clients, and then the real therapist is trying to, show their version of therapy. The problem with that often is that the people making the DVD or the video are usually trying to sell a book or trying to sell a model of therapy. So they usually pick very easy clients to portray. So a lot of trainees, and if you're a therapist out there, you can attest to this, by the time you get to your internship and you're actually treating real clients, real patients, you might have minimal experience actually seeing what therapy actually looks like. So it's just part of you got to just throw therapists in. You're just like, well, I know you might not know what to do, but you got to start somewhere. So I'll be right around the corner if you got to bop out of your office and come to me and ask what's up. And there are a few principles that I tell trainees in their first session. I'll say, I always look them in the eye and I say, do you know how to listen to somebody? And they'll be like, yeah, I know how to listen. Then I say, just listen. Just listen. Don't worry about doing the right thing. Don't worry about trying to fix them. Don't worry about trying to come up with a brilliant intervention. Don't even theorize. Don't necessarily even assess them. It's your first session of your entire career. You'll have 40 more years of glorious sessions. This is going to be potentially your worst session of all time because you have no idea what you're doing and you're very nervous. So focus on one thing, which is listen. Just hear them and just prove to your client that you're hearing them. And usually that gets into their head kind of. But anyway, so if these are real clients, this is great. And I wonder why in my university we're not watching the show. Maybe other professors are. I teach couples therapy, so maybe I need to get a license to show this at my university. Anyway, let's continue watching.
The things she was doing is the things that she could only imagine I would want if she never was paying attention.
For example,
it was going to be a costume calendar, and then it was a dominatrix, and then it was like, she had it was probably like a threesome. It was like stuff.
sexual events?
Yes, all
That you
yes.
knew, but you knew about it. It wasn't a surprise.
No.
It wasn't a complete surprise.
Yeah, so the therapist is trying to clarify, and that makes sense. Me watching, we're kind of dropped right in the middle of a session, I think, and I don't know what number session this is, but they're talking about something quite specific, and me as a viewer, I'm like, what are they talking about? It seems all over the place. Is that because the husband says things in very confusing ways, or is it because I'm just not privy to the previous conversations? The first thought I have is the husband is either playing it up for laughs, like he's wanting to exaggerate certain things in a funny way, or he actually believes he's entitled to everything in the world. I don't know which, or if it's in something else that's going on, but I don't know, or maybe it's a little both. Let's continue watching.
You're doing what you want to do for me instead of what I want you to do for me. And
So to get even more into the weeds, for example, the sexual fantasies played out would be Andy's sexual fantasies and not yours?
well, not exactly.
Is that what we're saying?
No, they were sort of like her description of what mine were if you never listened to me. I mean, they're objectively.
There was some fantasy of what you want, but it's not really hitting the mark.
To begin with, they all sound like fun.
I wish that they would have some kind of statement as to what the couple is there for. This is a big complaint I have about therapy depicted on television and movies, is we will frequently not either be privy to the conversation, or sometimes they don't even have that part of the conversation, which is, why is the client there? Clients come to therapy to ask the therapist for something. They want the therapist to do something for them. They have an outcome they're looking for. Usually couples will say, we want to work on our communication. Usually what that means is they want to reduce their conflict and they want to improve their relationship. They don't want to fight so much anymore. They're usually, by the time they end up in the therapy office, they've usually had some pretty significant fights, maybe for decades. Sometimes their sexual life has suffered, sometimes not. Sometimes they're talking about divorce. Sometimes they feel like they don't love the person anymore, or they don't feel loved by the other person. And so they want to reduce conflict and improve their relationship. That's usually the broad things. And I'm assuming that's what is this couple's goal, but I don't know. So as we're hearing this, the therapist would be thinking, okay, so the husband, I'm assuming they are a heterosexual couple married, but the husband is saying, for my birthday, I wanted a bunch of things, but my wife, my partner, gave me a bunch of things without actually asking me if I wanted those things, and the implication is he's upset about that. So the first thing I'd be thinking of as a therapist is not necessarily getting into the specifics of that, because it's a temptation in couples therapy in particular to start getting into the specifics, like, okay, well, what was the sexual fantasy that you wanted? And usually, you don't usually have enough. Couples therapy, there's not usually enough time. My sessions are 50 minutes, 55 minutes. Some people will go an hour and a half for couples therapy. It's not usual, but the hour flies by in couples therapy. You don't have enough time to get to everything you need to usually. And so I would say, okay, I don't need to know the details. And I would summarize. I would say, so it sounds to me like you had a wish for therapy for your birthday. And wife, it sounds like you were trying to give him what he wanted. Is that what I'm hearing from you? Yeah. It sounds like there was a mismatch of communication there. What happened there? Was it that he didn't communicate it effectively or at all? Was it that she didn't ask? Was it that there's some kind of passive, what was the cause and the foundation of the mismatch in terms of I have needs and someone is saying I'm trying to meet your needs, and they missed each other. Couples therapy almost always involves something along those lines. So that would be my first critique of this therapist is like, I don't know if I'd get into the specifics of it because it's not really important. But, sometimes it is, and sometimes you want to know the specifics because the details will help you to know what to do. But anyway, let's continue watching.
Like waiting, this was it, then like, no thanks. I'm just not interested.
You became angry?
I don't think angry, I think I'm disappointed. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. I don't know what I could do differently.
You don't know what you're doing wrong?
Yes. So imagine that I want her to do something differently, right? I could get her to do whatever I want. That's not what I want. What I want is for her to do whatever I want without me having to make it happen.
Okay, so this is an extremely common problem in relationships, and it's maybe even universal. There's this notion that we all want our partners to read our minds and give us what we want without us having to ask. Now, why is that? Well, because it's sort of the platonic ideal of getting your needs met by your partner, meaning that it's perfect, it's idealized. Your partner just knows what you want and gives you what you need without you having to ask, because by you having to ask, it kind of negates a little bit of the intention from the other person. Because then you think, well, if I have to ask for it, then they're only doing it because I asked for it. They're not just giving me love and attention, and they're not just giving me what I need because it comes from their heart. I don't know if maybe they're only giving me what I asked for because I asked for it, and they feel pressured into giving it. So it diminishes the gift to some extent. The other problem is that if I have to ask for what I want, then I might not get what I want, and that's a double hurt because one, I'm not getting what I want, and two, I asked for it and I'm being rejected. So it's much more preferable for us not have to ask, because then, if we don't get our needs met, then at least we didn't put ourselves out there by asking and then getting rejected. And all this has to do with our childhoods. When we're little, 0 to age 4, we are asking our parents and people around us for things all the time. I'm hungry, I'm tired, I want you to pick me up, I want you to pay attention to me, I want you to play with me, I don't want to go down for a nap, I want you to pick me up from my nap, I want you to change my diaper. You constantly am asking and signaling to your caregivers, I want this, I need this, I want you to look at me, I want you to love me, I want you to care about me. I want you to hold me. I want you, there's just so many things that kids on a second-by-second basis are asking from their parents. And when parents don't attune enough to their children and don't react well enough to their kids growing up for whatever reason, then we graduate into later childhood and adulthood with a insecurity about asking for getting our needs met. So it's a sign of insecure attachment that he has. He also noticed that she said, so it sounds like you're angry. And he said, I'm not angry. I'm just disappointed. This is a very common thing that you hear people say in life and in therapy, which now I don't know, maybe he wasn't angry. But it wouldn't be strange if he was angry, right? At least a little bit. And a lot of people, particularly men, will try to deny that they have emotions because they associate emotions with weakness. And early in life, they might have learned that if I have an emotion, I actually will get rejected. So it's just better off if I just don't ever have emotions. So there's that. there's a bit of an arrogance to him that I'm picking up on, not because he's a jerk face, but because he probably developed that persona as a way of protecting himself. I don't know if we're going to learn anything about his family of origin, but that's something that I'll say. I will say that I still don't know if these aren't actors. I'm guessing that they're real people in therapy, but I actually have no idea. If they are actors, they're pretty good actors. I'm guessing some of you watching probably know the answer to that. And maybe after I do this reaction, I'll look it up. But anyway, so yeah, very frequent complaint you will hear is, I don't want to have to ask to get my needs met. And I will instantly dispel that desire from people. Being in a good marriage means you, one, know what you want most of the time, know what you need most of the time, and you ask for it. You know what you want, and you ask for it. And then the person that hears it does their best to respond well to that bid. Now, there are various different ways you can bid for attention or bid for love or bid for something. You can ask outright, this is what I want for my birthday. Or you could say, so I'm really looking forward to my birthday, and I know last time you had a hard time reading my mind, so let me know if you need any ideas. There's various different ways that you can ask for attention for your birthday. More commonly, we will bid for love. Like, one way of bidding for love is to say, hey, I need you to love me right now. Demonstrate that you love me right now, please. Or, hey, let's cuddle. Or, hey, let's have date night. Or, hey, I was reading this book and there's this interesting thing that happened. Those are all bids for friendship, bids for attention, bids for connection. And so there are usually we will ask in sort of indirect ways for love and attention. But anyway, let's continue watching.
To just, I want to get a glass of water before I ask, and it's there waiting. And that...
Can I ask you something?
Of course.
Did you ever have anybody take care of you like that?
No.
That sounds really maternal. That sounds like, a mother-infant bond. Yes, we have our moments with love.
Right. So that's what it sounds like to me as well. And that's the fantasy of the child and sometimes the experience of a child. When you're 1 year old, 2 years old, your parents are so attuned to your needs that they sometimes can predict what you need before you know you need it. But usually kids will indicate, they'll cry or something. At the very least, the parent is ready usually right away with trying to meet your needs in good circumstances. And so the wife is like, it sounds like you want me to be your mom, and I don't know if that's the kind of relationship I want. Now, if the husband is saying, I want this to be mutual because I frequently will try to predict your needs. So there's a lot of nuances here. On one level, it's possible that the husband is wanting selfishly for a one-directional relationship. Probably, if that is what he's asking for, that's because he didn't get enough love and attention growing up. The other possibility is that every couple has its own vibe when it comes to this thing. Every couple has its own dial from 0 to 1. With some couples who are on 0, and they function with never really thinking about the other person's needs until it becomes clear what the other person needs. And there's nothing wrong with that. This sort of couple, you have to verbalize or communicate your needs to the other person. Now, if you crank it all the way up to 10, these other couples on the other end of the spectrum, they will spend a lot of time paying attention to their partner, trying to figure out what their partner needs. And they'll sort of catalog and observe their partner and know their patterns. And they will spend some time, not obsessively, sometimes obsessively, but in healthy terms, they just generally get a sense of, oh, I bet you he's thirsty. Let me get him a glass of water. Maybe even ask, hey, do you want a glass of water? Or, oh, I bet you she's feeling kind of distressed from work. Maybe I should give her some space. She doesn't have to ask me for space. I just know from the past that that's kind of what she needs after work, and so I'm going to give her some space. So there's different styles of relationships. And so maybe that's what he's asking for. Maybe he's saying, look, I pay attention a lot to your needs, and I try to predict your needs before you express them. And I try to meet your needs before you know you need them. And I would just like you to do the same. I'm not hearing him say that. Maybe we'll find out some more.
Lovers where that can happen, but I don't know. That's just what occurred to me when you were saying it.
That's a pretty profound thing to say.
Really? Not a fairly obvious, distracting, insignificant?
I'll go with profound.
What is profound about that? How is that profound?
Okay, interesting. So what we have here, I'm just totally taking a guess, is that the couple is having a fight, and at least what we're observing here is the husband is saying a lot of things that are coming across as arrogant, self-centered, and asking his wife to be a mother to him. And he's not being very cooperative. When the therapist throws things out, you notice he kind of pushes back. She's like, sounds like you're angry. He's like, oh, I wasn't angry. I was disappointed. And there's a way that he comes across, I'm guessing to the therapist, this is total speculation, that is causing the therapist to not really like him very much. This is what we call countertransference. And in couples therapy, countertransference is extremely heightened. Me and all the supervisees and trainees I've ever worked with, this is true about. When I'm working with an individual, if she was just working with him individually in therapy, let's say the countertransference would be at a 2 out of 10. In couples therapy, particularly by minute 45, your countertransference is going to be at an 8 out of 10, meaning you're going to start losing your objectivity. You're going to start feeling some anger towards one or both of these people, frustration, feeling inadequate as a therapist. And so I would suspect that was kind of mounting. And we'll rewind and watch that again. But I'm guessing that the therapist was mounting her countertransference towards him because of the way he comes across. And it's an inducement of rejection. Essentially, the therapist starts feeling upset, and then the therapist starts wanting to reject him. And then the wife says something like, well, it sounds like you want me to be your mom. And the therapist then says to her, wow, that sounds very profound. Now, if you just take it verbatim, the therapist is just supporting the wife in terms of what she's saying. But then we notice what happened there was the husband then says, no, it wasn't. It wasn't profound. It was mildly interesting, but it wasn't profound. And the wife is saying, oh, I'll take profound. The couple is perceiving it, and I think it might be inside the therapist communicated to the couple that the therapist is now taking the wife's side. Now, taking sides in couples therapy is a very complicated thing. In general, you're trying not to take sides, but occasionally you might if you're trying to actually help something happen. There are circumstances where you actually do want to take sides because you're trying to help the couple to reduce their conflict and come together more, and sometimes taking sides will facilitate that. When in doubt, you don't want to take sides. But anyway, so if I was to I'm hypothesizing about what's happening there, the therapist was having mounting countertransference towards him because he's actually transferring to her. He's treating her like the way that he was treated growing up. So if I was to really back up here, I would suspect if this is a real person, this would be an hypothesis that I would build, is that he was rejected growing up and neglected in some way. And he had to adopt this arrogant, self-centered, very self-assured persona in order to survive. And it's been his personality since he was very young. But it's to cover up a lot of insecurity and a lot of worry about not getting his needs met. Now he's in therapy and he's able to express that. And he's feeling a little vulnerable as he starts to express that a little bit. But he's not expressing it in a super vulnerable way, you notice. And he is seeing the therapist as his mom or his dad or something, and he is subtly rejecting her, subtly pushing her away. And she starts to feel that, and it hurts her, and she's not fully aware of how it's affecting her. And so she starts to have feelings in counter to that, transference. Transference is transferring your feelings and reactivity from your parents onto your therapist. So that's what I'm guessing he did. And then she has counter transference, which is a reaction to his transference. And that comes from her own issues in her background as well, and her own training and her own ability to manage her counter transference. And so she uses therapy words as a passive aggression against him. The therapist says, that's very profound, very supportive of the wife's indictment of his behavior. But this is pretty vulnerable to him, you see, because if he was neglected growing up, then he very much is worried that no one is going to care. Now, he's not doing himself any favors by saying things like, I want you to predict all of my needs and give me everything that I need before I ask for it. He's basically guaranteeing that he's going to get rejected in that way. But that's how we repeat these behaviors. We end up, as in an attempt to solve the problem, we use defenses developed early in life, and it basically perpetuates the pain that we're going through. This is, people come to therapy because they have problems. But anyway, so then the therapist so it's a triangle, right? So there's a triangulation there. There's conflict between the couple. She's being triangulated in. The anxiety gets transferred between husband and wife to husband and therapist, and then the therapist is now aligning with the wife, and then the husband now feels thrown under the bus. He doesn't deal with it in a vulnerable way, to be like, wow, that kind of hurts. It kind of feels like you're kind of therapist. It kind of feels like you're siding with my wife, and I have to say, I don't know, that kind of hurts my feelings. That'd be a vulnerable way of saying it, but because I'm guessing when he was young, that never worked out for him to be vulnerable. Instead, he just essentially attacks the therapist by arguing with the wife. You notice he doesn't turn to the therapist and say, therapist, no, that wasn't profound. He turns to his wife and says, no, that wasn't profound. Let's rewatch that again.
That sounds really maternal. That sounds like, a mother-infant bond. Yes, we have our moments with lovers where that can happen, but I don't know. That's just what occurred to me when you were saying it.
That's a pretty profound thing to say.
Really? Not a fairly obvious, distracting, insignificant?
I'll go with profound.
What is profound about that? How is that profound? The drawing that parallel? That's I'm sure if you open up one of these books, it's on the first fucking page.
Wow. Okay. This is getting good. This is very accurate couples therapy, by the way. Extremely accurate. Now, I've worked with hundreds, maybe thousands of couples, and they run the gamut in terms of their presentation, but the vibe of this is very accurate. The examples that they will usually provide in graduate school are not accurate. And I usually will say that in my classes. I'll say, well, we're watching this clip because this is the clip that we have available to us, but it's very tame compared to what actually happens. Right now, you noticed that he got pretty mean there. He's like, and that's one of the phrases that you'll hear clients like this say. So they'll want to push down the therapist. They'll want to, put her in her place. You can even say maybe some sexism is in there. It's hard to know. But, he says, oh, look at all these books, probably chapter 1. They talk about how that, I don't even know what he's accusing the therapist of, that in chapter 1, it's profound that maybe he's referring to like an Oedipus complex thing, or I don't know. But anyway, the energy is clear that he is attacking the therapist and saying the therapist doesn't know what she's doing, and that that word she used, profound, was very elementary, was very novice therapist thing to do. I want to rewatch this because this is a very common thing that I have seen in therapy with so many couples. And if you're a couples therapist, you've seen this too. And to be clear, it's not our job as therapists to say like, oh, he needs to grow up or something like that. What that indicates is like, okay, well, that's what he's doing. Why does he do that? And what wounds generate that impulse? And how do those wounds that generate those impulses interact, because both of these people, the husband and wife, both have wounds that they have defenses around that cause behavior that shoots them in the foot. He wants to be close. He wants to reduce conflict, but he's not helping. But it's not because he wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to be a jerk face. It's because of elaborate defenses that were developed early in life. Now, let's rewind a little bit and then we'll watch what the therapist does here. I'm trying to think what I would do. So right now we have what I would call a relationship rupture, and it's not what I call it, it's what the research calls it, but what I would identify as a relationship rupture between the therapist and the husband. I'm saying husband. I don't even know how these people identify gender-wise, but I hope you forgive me on that. So she should attend at least at some point in the near future to that relationship rupture, because the husband right now is that's probably, that statement of like, oh, that's no profound. That's a stupid thing. It's probably in chapter 1 of a book on her shelf. That's probably the tip of the iceberg. Underneath that might be a lot of rage towards the therapist and almost like giving up, like, she doesn't know what she's doing and we'll just get through this session and I'll never see her again. And underneath that is a tremendous wound that the therapist just stepped on. So what I would do as a client or as a therapist in this situation, I'm trying to think what I would do. I mean, there's a lot of different things that I could do. But I might turn to the husband. Okay, this is what I do. I don't know what number session this is either. It looks like maybe it's the first session. It's just a guess. But as a therapist, I might turn to the husband and say, okay, I get it. You're saying that the word I use, profound, you don't agree with. And I respect that. I'm still getting to know you as a couple. And, I'm giving it my best shot. And I apologize for using that word. I'm hearing I shouldn't have used that word, and I get that. And then he might have a response to that, and I would try to repair the relationship, because moving forward in the session without repairing that rupture doesn't bode well. But then as I'm validating the husband, the wife is starting to get upset because she's like, well, I don't know, I kind of liked the word profound. And are you saying that my point earlier was stupid the way he thinks my point was stupid? And then I would turn back to the wife very quickly and I'd say, so what I heard you say was that you felt as though he was asking you to be his mother. Now, we don't know what he was exactly asking. Maybe that's not what he was asking, but that's how it felt to you, right? So I would return to her and validate her while trying to manage his reactivity to it. So you notice the way I did that is that I'm trying to validate her, but if I validate her, he could actually feel invalidated. So how do I account for that? Well, I try to put it in words that I think that both of them will be able to accept. So I might say, so it sounds like it felt like to you that he's asking you to be maternal in a one-way relationship. It sounds like that's what you heard. And then I very quickly say, that might not be what he meant to say or what he meant to have you hear, but that's how it felt to you as he was talking about that. So I'm giving him an out by saying, maybe he didn't mean it that way. So, because if I completely validate her, now I've ruptured the relationship again with him, and now I've got to repair that to get back on the rails. Now, I will say that the couples that I tend to work with for years. And so relationship ruptures are much more easily detected, and they're not as severe because we have so much relationship behind us and so much trust that any little thing that I might do that will disappoint the clients is not as problematic to the relationship, because we have such a track record of things going well. But anyway, let's rewind it a little bit. So what we're going to see is she's going to use that profound word. He's going to get upset. He comes across as kind of jokey. She laughs. You notice that the wife laughs right away because I'm guessing she learns that she has to handle him by laughing, because that helps to calm the situation. But if you just look at the content of what's happening, he's being aggressive. He's saying, no, therapist, you're not right. It wasn't profound. My wife's idea was simplistic and silly. And I'm sure one of these books on the wall it's a simple idea. Now, he doesn't have that mirth in his language, but it definitely is coming across that way. And then we'll see how the therapist reacts to that.
That's a pretty profound thing to say.
Really? Not a fairly obvious, distracting, insignificant?
I'll go with profound.
What is profound about that? How is that profound? The drawing that parallel? Is it? I mean, that's like I'm
duh.
sure if you open up one of these books, it's on the first fucking page.
I'm just wondering if you're aware of how quickly you move to devaluation. Do you know that?
I think that I don't care how quickly I move to.
So this is valid for the therapist to say, and it's a good word. And if we're taking a track of feminism and sexism awareness, this is a good track to take, depending on where it ends up, to say that I, as a woman, am interacting with you as a man, and I'm the professional here. And I offered up an idea that wasn't contrary to what you were saying. I was just supporting your wife, and you're tearing me down as a female professional, as a woman professional. Now, she's not saying that word, but it's essentially what we have here is there's a number of different levels to this. So to put that to conclude, a feminist approach will sometimes involve this kind of conversation. Essentially, it's like, look, you just devalued me, and you're using a power play to devalue me, and I'm guessing you do that to your wife, and that has to stop. That's just not going to help anyone. There's no reason why you have to devalue people. So let's change that behavior. There's some validity to that, but we also have to think of outcomes. And this is the thing that I talk with my trainees about all the time, because they'll come to me and they'll say, so I have this husband, and boy, is he a piece of work. He's always devaluing me. He devalues his wife all the time. And so I just want to let him have it. I just want to tell him, like, look, you can't devalue people anymore. And there's a big difference between what is right or what is okay to say or appropriate to say and what is helpful. Sometimes those things overlap, but they don't always overlap. So it's the therapist's job to be helpful. It's not the therapist's job to put him in his place. If it's helpful to put him in his place, then put him in his place. If it's helpful to call out a sexist, devaluing persona or activity, then do that. But if it's not going to help in the end, then why would you do it? Maybe it's something you have to wait to do down the line. So now how do we define what is helpful? Well, the couple is trying to establish an ongoing relationship with the therapist. And so if you get into a fight with him and he hates you and he never comes back to therapy, then that isn't helpful, right? Now, there's a line there, right, in terms of sometimes if someone is just being so sexist or so racist or something, you just have to say, look, I don't care if it's helpful or not. I'm just going to say no to that. That is something I don't care if I ruin this relationship. I'm not going to allow him to devalue me as a woman therapist. And there's some professional validity to that as well. But you have to be conscious of that in the moment. You can't just convolute your treatment with you can't convolute your theory and your treatment modality and your efforts to help a client with just drawing a line with some people. To exaggerate it, if he stood up and was going to punch her in the face and she pulled out mace and sprayed him in the face, you wouldn't necessarily say, well, is it helpful to mace him? Is that really what's going to help him stay in therapy? And you'd say, like, no, you deserve to, as a professional, to protect yourself. And it applies to sexism as well. I don't know if where that's coming from is sexist. Maybe he treats everyone this way. It's hard to know. At the very least, it's unfair to just devalue the therapist, and the therapist is calling that out. So let's watch what happens here. And if this actually helps, there's two things that need to happen. One is the relationship between the therapist and the client has to be preserved. And two, does it actually help the couple to reduce their conflict and to improve their intimacy? The big risk here, like I said, is to go here, which is a valid statement, but if you go there, he might end up blowing out of therapy and never coming back. And where are you then? And the wife isn't going to want that. The wife wants him to engage in therapy, and so you're not doing anyone any favors by jumping the gun. Now, what I will say to trainees is catalog that away, write it in your psychotherapy notes, and say, at some point, I need to address the fact that he devalues me and maybe women in general. I don't know. But today, I'm going to forego that to preserve the relationship, and I will definitely get to that at some point because we have many sessions ahead of us. That's what I always tell therapists is whatever mistake you make or whatever thing you didn't catch in the moment, you have dozens of sessions ahead of you usually. So don't worry about missing something or not jumping on something right away. You very rarely only have one chance to work on something. So let's rewind this again and then watch what happens.
I'm just wondering if you're aware of how quickly you move to devaluation. Do you know that?
I think that I don't care how quickly I move to devaluation.
Whether you care about it or not, I just
am I
want to
aware
see
that
if
sometimes
you're aware
I
of
move
it.
quickly to devaluation? Yes.
But I'm also noticing how difficult it is to actually meet you. I notice even in the way I'm talking to you that it's very hard to get it right. Like when I try to say back to you what's going on, what I just heard, it's never right.
So this is very brave of this therapist. It seems to be going over well, which is great. She's delivering it well, and I'll commend both of them. The therapist is being brave. She's taken a leap, and she is opening herself up to criticism. He could easily stand up and say, "You're a terrible therapist, and I'm going to give you a bad Yelp review or something." That's the worry that therapists. I've seen therapists have their careers ruined by a bad Google review, honestly. So it is a concern to therapists. Because when you're looking for a therapist, a lot of times you'll Google your therapist, and clients don't usually leave Google reviews. So if you're Googling 5 therapists that you're shopping around, and one of the therapists only has 1 review, and it's this screed of how terrible you are as a therapist, no one's going to call you, and then your business basically just goes belly up. I actually had a supervisee where that happened. So it's a real worry, or just worry that word's going to get out that you're a terrible therapist. And like I said, a lot of therapists are insecure. It's a problem. And so I very much commend a therapist for really going for it in this moment. And she's saying all the right things. And I commend him for going with it. He's allowing it to happen. And this is, getting to the heart of the matter that you probably would really want to get to in the early stages of therapy, because his arrogant pushing back on the therapist, that transference of rejection of the therapist isn't going to help therapy. Now, I'll say from my style as a therapist, I tend not to do this. I tend to take more time and allow people like him to push back on me. I'm more of a judo person rather than a karate person. Judo meaning that I work with resistance. Like someone is saying, "Well, yeah, you just read in that book that you just said something really simplistic," and I'll just be like, "Oh, okay, yeah, sometimes I say simplistic things. I don't always know what's going on. How would you define what just happened?" So I don't push back on the resistance. I just go with it. It's like, yeah, you're right. Okay, well, how would you interpret what just happened? And then I put him in the driver's seat, and sometimes that'll really work. At the very least, it doesn't risk ruining the relationship between me and a client. So this is a very interesting moment, and I cannot believe that it's taken me this long to watch this show. A lot of you have been asking me to watch this show. We're like 6 minutes in, and I've been talking for I don't know how long. Now, the question is this interesting to you? Because this is getting into some weeds about what it is like to do couples therapy. I'm guessing to you couples therapists, you might be at least mildly interested in this, hopefully. But a lot of you watching aren't therapists, so please let me know in the comments below if this interests you at all, because maybe it's too technical. The other thing I'll say is I'm doing a lot of one-off episodes where I'm just watching different shows that y'all have asked me to react to, and I'm going to wait and see which ones get more traction. And so if this gets traction, then I'll do more. But maybe I'll just do more of this just because I enjoy it so much, and maybe I can just use this as like lectures for my couples therapy class that I teach. But anyway, let's continue watching.
And when you correct me, I can see why you're correcting me. I understand the nuance and where I missed the point.
That's very frustrating for me.
What
Yes,
I
I'm not
want to hear is, why is the moment where someone is not just right, why is that so devastating?
I don't know that it's devastating. I think it's...
You did it just then.
Right.
Right. So this is a very common dynamic that happens in therapy. And it is something that concerns therapists. This therapist is dealing with it pretty well. She's calling it out. She's describing it. We'll see how this works out. The husband is seemingly going along with it, which is great. He's softening a little bit. You hear him agree. It's like, it is frustrating when I have cat hair on my face. It is frustrating when I feel like you don't really hear what I'm saying. And so this conversation I have had so many times. This is really a brilliant show, because I don't know if I've ever seen a show that really depicted these must be real couples, because you can't improv. You can't have actors improv this. But maybe they are. Let me look it up, actually. I got to find out. Okay, so according to Vulture, the couples are not considered patients. They're called participants because they wanted to work around the ethics of confidentiality and other kinds of issues. And the participants are actually paid to be on the show. But they are real couples, and they are in real conflicts. So that's interesting. The dynamic of when you're talking to someone, particularly in couples therapy, maybe exclusively in couples therapy. No, definitely individual therapy too, but couples therapy, 99 times out of 100, this will happen in couples therapy, where I and my trainees or colleagues will be saying something to a client. They'll, as therapists, we want to reflect, we want to summarize, we want to mirror, we want to validate, and we'll often listen to someone as they're saying, and we'll try to summarize, or we'll try to reframe what they're saying a little bit. And there are certain clients that will almost universally reject what you as a therapist have said. They'll be like, no, that's not really quite right. Or literally like, that what you just said is ridiculous, and it's in the chapter 1 of some simplistic book on your shelf. And so why would someone do that? Well, it's usually because of a variety of reasons, usually mistreatment growing up, that results in the person having to put up walls where, in order to survive, they basically had to just prejudge everything that was happening outside of their self. Sometimes we call this narcissism. Sometimes we call this avoidant attachment. There's various other terms for it, but and sometimes it's one and not the other. Sometimes it's all the above. But the point is that when you're young and you're being neglected or mistreated in some way, you learn like, look, I need to depend on myself, and other people can't be trusted. And so everything gets filtered through that assumption. And so everything that everyone says, including therapists, is like you're just extremely skeptical. Like, no, that's not really quite right. The other problem is that if someone sees me, then that means my walls aren't there. If someone validates, if a therapist actually reflects accurately what's going on for me and sees me for who I am, then that means my walls are no longer up, which that means danger. That's a dangerous situation. When I was younger, and maybe throughout my life, when my walls weren't up, I would get hurt. And so a really effective way to keep up my walls is to say, no, you don't really get me. You're not over here. You're not in the walls. You don't get it. You don't understand. And you know what? You're kind of stupid. So just stay away. And some clients will definitely do that. Now, how do you deal with that? Well, this is one approach, whereas you basically just steamroll the situation and try to break the client of the behavior. And the client seems to be responding well to that style. My style is, again, to work with resistance and to put the client into the role of the expert. And I'll just be like, okay, I got it wrong. I get things wrong all the time. You tell me how I got it wrong. And then, okay, well, I'll tell you how you got it wrong. You got that wrong. You got that wrong. And then I would reflect up. So, okay, so what I'm hearing is I got that wrong. And then they might proceed to be like, no, you're not quite getting it right. And I'd be like, okay, tell me more. So what does this do? Well, what this does is it means I don't have to worry about a rupture in the relationship. The other thing it does is I'm providing a corrective experience for him by saying, I am so willing to listen that even when you put me down, and you say that, and you give me this message or even explicit messages that I'm stupid and I don't know what I'm doing as a therapist, I'm still here and I still care and I can take it and it's okay and you're safe and you can pretty much do whatever you want as a client and I'm okay. After the session, I might scream into a pillow, but right now I'm okay. So there's various other different approaches, all of which have their pros and cons. And every therapist has their own style. I'm guessing that this therapist has this style, and I think she's pulling it off. This is a great show.
And when you correct me, I can see why you're correcting me. I understand the nuance and where I missed the point.
That's very frustrating for me.
What
Yes,
I want to hear is why is the moment where someone is not just right, why is that so devastating? That's
I don't know that it's
yours.
devastating. I think it's...
See, you did it just then.
Right.
Devastating
Right.
is not quite the right word, and you're going to correct it for
Right.
devastating, and you can't
Right.
see that devastating
Right. That's okay.
might have like,
Well,
you know,
it is simply not devastating. That is not a proper use of that word in any of the words.
Right. So that would be something that if I was a little birdie in her ear, I would say, don't use devastating because one, it didn't look like it was devastating to him. And two, he's going to key in on that word. So use a softer word. Like, okay, when I am not quite on the mark, the way it comes across to me is you reject everything about it instead of saying, well, you got some of it right, but you didn't really get, that might be the way I would phrase it because there's less debate there. To use the word devastating, now you're back into the realm where he has every right to say like, well, it isn't devastating to me because it just frankly isn't devastating. And now you're back at square one. The other thing I would do differently, even with her style, is when he said, it is very frustrating. That's the first time we've heard in this session where he's actually been a little bit vulnerable. When people are vulnerable, particularly people that have all these walls, you want to pounce on that and really nurture that. So if he was to say, yeah, it is very frustrating when you miss the mark, I would pause and I would say, it's very frustrating to you. I totally understand that. You want your therapist to understand you. So you notice I'm validating, but I'm also kind of suggesting, I get you. I get that you want to be heard, and I really want to hear you. So you could do that very quickly, and then you could proceed. So I don't know how this is going. I don't know how the therapist is going to get this back onto the rails. Let's see what happens.
I mean, unless you're being hyperbolic, and I don't know what the point of that would be. If the point was
I
clarity.
wasn't being hyperbolic. I'm actually assuming that on some...
So I think that was a mistake. He's saying, unless you're being hyperbolic, because blah, blah, blah. And then she's like, I wasn't being hyperbolic. So now you're in a bickering match with your client. She could have easily said, okay, yeah, I guess I was being hyperbolic. Devastating, yeah, that was an exaggeration. I guess I was using it for effect. She could have easily said something like that. To get into a bickering match with your client, I don't know how helpful that's going to be. Now, maybe it all depends on the outcome. So if this works out, then it was all a good choice that she made every step of the way. Or maybe she made most, good enough choices through the meandering path that it was a good choice. As a therapist myself, if you filmed me doing therapy, there would be multiple moments where you would say like, well, that, or even myself, I would cringe. I'm like, I wonder how this therapist feels about if she has to watch the show, if she cringes at all. Usually therapists cringe at their own work. So anyway, let's continue watching.
In some way...
How about deeply inconvenient?
No, I don't think it's inconvenient. I think there's a much more emotional underlying structure.
Okay, so that's good. So that's a good direction to go in. That I would go. That was what I was saying earlier, was that he said frustrating, and I would really try to highlight that emotion. And so she's trying to get to that, which is great. And hopefully that will be a bonding moment that he can feel heard and understood, and he can soften it. But she has to, she's in a mode right now where she's trying to make her case. So a very useful thing to do when you're trying to figure out what to do in therapy or how to evaluate the usefulness of a particular moment in therapy is like, forget that this is therapy and just think about if these three were just having lunch, what is the meta communication? What would you say is the style of communication? Right now, the therapist is trying to convince she is trying to convince him who he's skeptical, and she's trying to convince him. She's trying to make her case, and he is, by his face, he's like, "Oh, honey, you don't know what you're talking about." So as a therapist, you want to pay attention to that and say, like, okay, how did I get here? How did I get to a position where I'm trying to make a case for him and I'm scrambling, and he is judging everything I'm saying and shooting me down and being very, very calm and condescending. But he's kind of right, because I am trying to interpret what is in his mind, and he is the only person who really knows what's going on in his heart and mind. So I'm trying to tell him what his heart and mind is doing. That is not a good activity in therapy. I must have got off the rails. I must have hurt him. I must have not validated him enough. I must have perturbed him enough, or too soon or something. And so that's what I'd be thinking. I don't know what she's thinking in this moment. Maybe she is like, nope, this is the direction I want to go in. I'm going to persevere, and I'm not going to give up. And in the end, I'm going to get somewhere. Now, you notice that the wife is starting to look potentially a little bored or maybe a little defeated, because now I'm guessing the wife is thinking, because they often do in situations like this, great, the therapy session is all about my husband and how stubborn he is, and we're no longer talking about my needs and stuff. And so sometimes in these early phases of therapy, you have to kind of go back and forth. Anyway, this is just thoughts I have in my mind. Now, I'm not criticizing her. I'm just commenting on what I would be doing in that situation. Whenever I train therapists, I try to be clear about this. I'm not always good about this, but I usually say, well, this is what I would do, but I'm not saying it's the only way to do it. I'm just saying, as an experienced therapist and your supervisor, I want to, model for you like a different option. And a lot of supervisees will appreciate that. But in no way am I saying my way is the best way or the only way. There's a lot of ways to get to where you want to go, and we'll just have to see how this works out.
To this.
Okay. But how can we quickly determine whether that's true or not?
You can ask yourself if you want to take something of what I'm saying to see if it's useful to you, or if you want to spar with me. If you don't want to spar with me, we don't have to discuss the accuracy. We just have to see if it's useful, what I'm saying, whether it's accurate or not.
I don't know how to do that. I don't know that I've ever been devastated in any prior event when that occurred, including my birthday.
So he's still focusing on the word devastation. Now, it's starting to look like his emotional wounds are so profound, if you will, that his defenses are so rigid that it's going to be a hard nut to crack. And so when I experience clients like this, I say, okay, I'm not going to get anywhere in the first session regarding changing this aspect of his personality. These defenses have been in place for 45 years. I'm not going to be able to change that overnight. So I have to work with it, and I have to set that as an agenda moving forward. I will work with people like him for years before I get 25% change in those defenses. It takes a long time. So that's what I would do. I would just sort of, okay, well, let's get away from the devastation word. So again, this is just my style. He's still keying on the devastation word. And I, as a therapist, would say, okay, so what I'm hearing from you is that when I use the word devastation, that just wasn't true for you. And I cannot define how you feel about things. You're the only one who can tell me how you feel. And I use the word devastation, and you're telling me that that was wrong. That word doesn't make any sense. And I respect that because you are the only person who can tell me how you feel. And thank you for telling me how you feel, that it was not devastation. So I can scratch that off the list. Thank you for that. So what I'm doing there is I am trying to put to bed the devastation word, which it sounds like they're really going to hammer on. And 2, I'm giving the message that I really care, or I'm trying to. And 3, I have judoed him, and now he's telling me how he feels. So you notice that even though he hasn't really told me how he feels, I have now said, well, by shooting me down, you have told me that you did not feel devastation. This is a glass half full thing. Is this making sense to people? I hope it is. Anyway, let's continue watching.
I didn't feel devastated.
You said disappointed.
I was disappointed.
Okay, so go with that.
There, a breakthrough.
So I would suspect that his distress level in that session was actually pretty high. He looked very calm and cool, and but I'm guessing that he was very distressed. And when people are distressed, they don't usually have functional things to do in therapy. But anyway, so it looks like we're going to watch another couple coming up. So maybe I should just wrap it up there. All right. So we'll see how this episode is received on YouTube. If it's received well enough, then maybe I'll do more of them. If no one likes this, and I'm talking to technically, and it's just a sort of an unwanted sort of service on YouTube, then I won't do it. But we'll find out. Man, did I have a lot of things to say about that. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.